Open the public hearing, the Joint Standing Committee on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs for the inquiry into racism, hate, violence toward Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Before we kick off into official proceedings, I'll hand over to Mr Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land which we meet today. This is obviously being inquiry country. And thank you all, Big Esso, for joining us on the mat today and the importance that the mat has in Torres Strait Islander culture, as you were born on the mat and you will leave on the mat, and it is all important decisions are of course held upon the mat. So I acknowledge the importance of the mats being here today. I also wish to pay respect. I know there is a lot of sorry business in community at the moment, and we really appreciate the opportunity to still be here today to have this really important hearing. I would now like to throw over to you, Uncle, for an opening prayer, if I may.
Let us pray. O Lord, grant us the serenity, the tranquility, the peace of mind to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Lord, we thank you for this day, Lord, for this hearing. Lord, that your Holy Spirit will be with us, guide and strengthen us during our deliberations. Lord, for the benefit of our people and the nation of Torres Strait. Zenathkes. We thank you, Lord. Bless the members that are here today. Bless the community, Lord, and Zenathkes. Thank you, Lord, and we give you back all glory, honor, and praise. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
That's all.
Thank you for the prayer, and Matt for the acknowledgement. My very formal words next feel like they pale in comparison to the words already said this morning. So apologies that this feels very formal compared to that. In accordance with the committee's resolution of 6 August 2025, this hearing will be broadcast on Parliament's website. There'll be audio that's broadcast live, and the proof and official transcripts of proceedings will be published on the inquiry website as well. Answers to questions taken on notice today will be put on the inquiry's website. And I remind members of the media who may be present or listening online of the need to fairly and accurately report proceedings of the committee. I now call on representatives from the Torres Strait Regional Authority to give evidence. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Patrick Muka, Deputy Chairperson for Torres Strait Regional Authority. I'll hand it to our CEO to introduce himself and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Charlie Caddy, Chief Executive Officer of the Torres Strait Regional Authority.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Gaetano Lui. I'm the member for Yama on the Torres Strait Regional Authority, but also recognised as an elder statesman for Torres Strait.
Morning. My name is Regina Turner. I'm the TSRA member for Hammond Island, traditionally known as Kiriri. Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Sharon Clark. I'm Yirrkangji Mabiog, with connections to Yam Island and Musig, and I'm the Program Manager for Governance and Leadership in Torres Strait Regional Authority.
Thank you very much. I've got another very formal spiel that I need to read before we get to an opening statement. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false and misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard, and it attracts parliamentary privilege, and it is being broadcast live. I remind any members of the gallery who may be joining us today that you do need the consent of the committee to take any pictures or video of proceedings throughout the day. If you see people taking photos or filming, it is because they have already got the consent of the committee before doing so. We are joined online via teleconference by the Deputy Chair, Mr Venning. He's got a nameplate down here, so he is joining us via teleconference. You can see from the nameplates in front of you which committee members are with you today in the room too. I will now invite you to make an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the Joint Standing Committee today on the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs. My name is Patrick Muka. I am the Deputy Chairperson of Torres Strait Regional Authority, or also known as TSRA. Ngai Zenat Kesa Lake, Ngai Gudamalu Lake, Ngai Duani Lake, Ngau Augad Daibau Gadal, Ngau Zugub Tagain, Ngau Gub Zay. That was a cultural introduction for myself as well, because I am also a Parliament TSRA member and also a traditional man. I acknowledge the traditional owners, the land on which we meet today, Waibeni, and pay my respects to the Kararek people and the elders past, present and future. On behalf of TSRA, I also acknowledge families and communities in Sorry business. Your visit here today on Waiben and Zenetkes is important. We see it as an opportunity. Welcome, Standing Committee. To understand the experience of the local people, you must also understand the region itself. The Torres Strait Regional Authority, or TSRA, is the lead Commonwealth agency in the Torres Strait and Northern Peninsula area. I am one of 20 board members elected by our community for our community. It is a privilege and honour to serve. We live in one of the most unique and remote regions of Australia. You can only reach where I'm from, Duan, by a boat or a helicopter. That's how remote it is. It's isolated remote, not only remote. This remoteness also shapes our lives as well. But it should not block our opportunities or life outcomes. TSRA rejects all forms of racism, hate and violence directed at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples. Racism is not on individual acts. We feel it is the systems, policies and funding models that fail our islands, communities and ignore our people. I'll give you one example of fisheries that happens up here, which is beach de mer, which is a slug. When the season is on, all the islanders go out and fish. And we are heavily regulated and heavily compliance as well. But when the illegal fishes happen, there's no compliance. I see that as a form of racism. And when the issue gets pushed up to the right authorities, it gets passed around and nothing ever gets done about it. And another experience I can share is also around the school traveling. The school traveling that comes when the high schoolers go down to boarding school and that, when the flights get cancelled in Cairns or Horn Island, there is no form of support. They are stranded on those islands. And families have to make their own arrangements for accommodation and so forth. These experiences are not unique to one person, one community, or one island. They are felt across Zenetkes. And in 2026, this is not good enough. I can share one incident that just happened yesterday as well. But I won't go into detail about it because it's been reported and under investigation as well. It just happened yesterday. And sorry guys, nervous. Yeah, it happened yesterday and it got reported, and correct actions are taking place. And I will hand it over to our elder statesman and former TSRA chair, Mr. Louis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Muka. Just by way of introduction again, my name is Gitano Louis. I am also recognized as the elder statesman for Torres Strait. And just by way of background, I go back to the 70s when I was with the elders. I was instrumental in setting up this organization, the Torres Strait Regional Authority. And it was set up on the basis of moving towards autonomy for Torres Strait. We had the state government with the Island Coordinating Council at the time, which I was the chair of, and it was through that process that we were able to establish the Torres Strait Regional Authority. That came about after the Mabo decision. And I talk to you today not from history. I speak from memory, because memory is immutable. History, anybody can change it. And I talk from here, art. We have a saying in Torres Strait that says, the past must exist for the present to create the future. The past must exist for the present to create the future. Past, here. I'm the past. Present is them younger ones here. In the 70s, when I first came on as the community councillor on Yam Island, and the elders at the time, I was the youngest among the oldest. Today, sitting on the TSRA board, believe it or not, I'm the oldest among the youngest, as you can see. What you have is the past and the present. We will create the future for Torres Strait. We will determine what direction that we will be heading, where we are going. All the hindrance that we faced in the past with racism and all of the barriers that we've had to overcome, it's been an up and down ride for my people and for this region. It has to stop, and the only way it's going to stop is when we take control of our own destiny. That is the only way my people will survive, is for us to maintain the integrity and the vision that our elders have left behind for us. It is not forgotten. It is written in stone. And I sit here today as the last surviving elder of that era of leadership. All the others have gone. I'm the last one. All my elders. And I speak this on their behalf, that things have to change by both the state and the Commonwealth government in looking at our situation in Torres Strait. We are looking at changing the name of Torres Strait to Zenatkes. Torres is the name of Spaniard. Zenatkes explains what the Torres Strait really is. It's the passageway between the two Daudai, we call it. The mainland of Asia and PNG, and Australia is the other Daudai. We exist through our own culture, our tradition, that's being handed down by our elders. There's only one way forward for us, is to be able to determine our own future. And I say this, I know this could be the starting point for changes to happen in Torres Strait. I don't know how long God has given me to live on this earth, but I want to make sure that the vision of our histories, of our elders, will not go astray. All we ask government for 3 things: look, listen and adapt. When you come to Torres Strait, look at the situation that we have. Don't come with your own opinion to say that you know what's best for us. Listen to what we say. That what we will determine, we will tell you. And you adapt. That's the word, adapt, that people refuse to accept. Instead of listening to us, you adapt your ways to meet our standard, instead of us trying to adapt to meet yours. That's the problem that we face. And that's why when we talk about self-determination for Torres Strait, it's about being able to manage and control our own affairs, to make decisions that affects our everyday lifestyle. And listen to this, to be influential in the policy development of both the state and the Commonwealth development, state and Commonwealth governments, so that any policies that is developed when it hits the shores of Torres Strait, the boundary of Torres Straits, we will determine how it is implemented. We will determine the outcome. If you really want to see the closing the gap, give us that opportunity. That's the way we will do it. Because policies have been set for our people, it suits everybody else except us. And we want to use our own island custom to be able to work together. And it worked before. In the 80s, we've set up the Island Coordinating Council. And there was 2 ways of running our communities. We had the island law and the Western law. And it worked. For some reason in 2008, the Queensland government decided to amalgamate. We lost everything. These are things that's very real that is happening. And these are the things that's holding us back. Because people on the mainland thinks they know what is best for us. That's got to stop. We can't go on the way we're going. And I express this because, and I speak verbally in that sense that I know what the feeling of my people is, and I know what the vision of the elders has been, and it still is. It's very much set in concrete. And so the only way forward for us to control our own affairs is through self-determination. And we would hope we will get the support of both the state and the Commonwealth government. Next year, I say this, and I want the committee to take it on board, please. We're going to be celebrating 35 years of the flag, of the Torres Strait flag. And 35 years of Mabo. Those 2 significant events that happened in Torres Strait, one after another. And by then, I'm hoping that when we raise the Torres Strait flag next year, on the 29th of May, after 35 years, it will be more meaningful for our future generations than what it is today. Today, because of the generational change, our people are still trying to come to grips, the younger generation, the millennials, the Generation Z, are trying to come to terms with what the flag really means. That's something that we need to hold it close to us, because the meaning of the flag has everything to do with our future. The star in itself, although it represents the divisions in our community, the traditional groups in our community, the star represents the moral compass for our children to come, for our generations to come, and how they will move ahead. And for Mabo, that's something that we've never explored, nor have we understood really what the decision meant until now. Sui generis, a Latin word meaning of its own kind. We were so brainwashed, we thought Mabo was only about native title. It was only about Terranalias, defeating the myth of Terranalias. It's more than that. We are now seeking to establish that ruling of the High Court that said that native title is sui generis, of its own kind. It's a ruling of the court. If that's the case, then myself and my people would be one of a kind. Listen to us. And that sui generis or generis have been used all over the world. Nunavut in Canada, for example, New Caledonia. These are examples of how it's being used. And it goes back to the way we run our own affairs, as we do things in line with the Western system. That can be done. We're ready for it. We're all geared up for it. And I know we can do it. It's not going to take much to happen. It's going to take the goodwill of government, both the state and the Commonwealth, to recognize that and to sit with us and to be part of the whole process. And the attitude has to change from both governments. And I repeat myself again, those three things: look, listen, and adapt. And we all will get there with one heart, one mind, and one spirit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now proceed to questions, and I'll begin with Senator Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for appearing today. I feel like I'm echoing. I'll move that away. My mouth is loud enough. I don't need an echoing microphone. Sorry, wasn't expecting to go first.
Sorry, Lydia.
It's all right. Here we go. I just want to get an understanding of the TSRA, because I've talked to a lot of people, and there's always black politics involved, and I'm usually the first one to hear about it. So I just want to know, is the TSRA a funding body, service delivery agency, or something else? And can you describe that? Because, I see that you're all wearing Commonwealth badges. So are you part of the Commonwealth? Do you work for the Commonwealth? And if you do, how does community control work here? How does the community get a say in self-determining their futures, particularly for all of the islands?
Thank you, Senator Thorpe, for the question. So the TSRA, we're a Commonwealth statutory authority. So our functions come under the ATSI Act 2005, and we also, our governance and accountability under the PGPA Act 2013. So TSRA is the lead Commonwealth funding body for the Torres Strait region. TSRA is one of its kind. It's a very unique Commonwealth statutory authority. You won't find one like this anywhere else in Australia, where we have a community elected board. So TSRA has a board consisting of 20 members, representative of all the islands in Zenat Kes, and including the 2 communities on the NPA, Northern Peninsula area, Bamaga and Saisia. And so TSRA board is directly elected by the community from their communities. And so in terms of where that community control and where that issues from the community get brought to the TSRA, it is through our board who are directly elected there. We sometimes get painted with the ATSIC picture. We're very different to ATSIC. ATSIC got closed down, I can't remember the date, but we're still here, and we still have the model that Member Foyama spoke about when they initially set up the TSRA. We were a part of the wider Indigenous portfolio group that come under the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Senator McCarthy. So, Senator Thorpe, that's pretty much a quick summary of TSRA.
Thank you. Me personally, I don't trust the government because they are colonising us every minute of every day, and they're taking away our self-determining right, our birthright. And I'm hearing that that's going on here. I'm hearing that women can't birth on country. I'm hearing that you can't get dialysis on country. I'm hearing about the amount of deaths that are going on here. We know that Queensland government are absolutely racists, and the Cairns Hospital is a bunch of racists as well. Our people go there basically to die. So how do you engage with the people from all the islands for them to be able to fulfil their self-determining right? Because you're basically agents of the government, right? So governments are racist, and then they set up these bodies that divide our people because they're still the masters. They still dictate to you what you can do, how much money you get. So how do community access the money you get, and do you give community the self-determining right to access federal funds themselves, or do you control that for all the islands?
Thank you, Senator. So TSRA provides, as I mentioned there, funding programs to fund NGO services that are being delivered in communities. We're not a blockage or a conduit through to the wider NIAA, for example, the National Indigenous Australians Agency, and or any other Commonwealth funding bodies out there. So our communities and organisations and people have direct access to those other funding bodies, including ourselves. I will note, in terms of funding there, it is a huge challenge for us because the need is always greater than the funding that we receive. And I'll take this opportunity to sort of highlight when I first started in TSRA, X amount of years ago, our appropriation was $50 million. That's gone down over the years. Cost of living is going up. Cost of delivering business in the region is much higher than most, if not all, remote areas in Australia. As you can see and appreciate, Senators, we don't have a road. All our freight and everything comes up here by ship. And so you pretty much triple or quadruple the cost of doing business up here. And it is a challenge for us. We're with limiting budgets every year that's being cut. And we do recognize that, the needs that are out there and that we're trying to address, and our community-based organizations are trying to address, is greater than the funding we receive. So, yeah, Senator Thorpe, while we deliver programs through TSRA for the region is also eligible to apply directly to other Commonwealth funding bodies. But yeah, again, I highlight that challenge there in lack of funding to meet the full needs.
So if community come and say, we want dialysis on our island, we don't want to come here for dialysis, and we want to birth on our own island because that's the law of the land. They want to pass away on their own land, that's the law. How do you facilitate that? How do you support that island to get their dialysis and ensure that our women are able to birth on country? Because I hear out there that government control everything here. Employment, education. You got a white fella running a school here who's racist, I hear. So how do you meet the needs of the people that are coming to you with these real stories that keep our people connected to country and keep our people alive? How do you facilitate that? Because I'm hearing that you're not, right? I'm hearing that you're not doing that and that you're a government agency and community control doesn't exist because they're not supported to self-determine their own destiny. So if I'm hearing that, then what do you say to that? Like, how do you support other islands to self-determine?
If I can make an intervention here, Senator, that going back to when we first created all this, the Island Coordinating Council and the TSRA. Now, we were the political football between state and Commonwealth. That was the biggest problem. Because each time we went to the state, they would say that's Commonwealth responsibility. And when we go to the Commonwealth, they say it's the state responsibility. So by creating the two, it was trying to bring them together so that you don't pass the buck, so to speak, and getting them to accept their responsibilities as a state and Commonwealth. And part of it still exists today. So when you talk about things, we have to look at what state responsibilities and what is Commonwealth. That's why it's very difficult for us to do a better coordination because of the different policies that affects from the state and the Commonwealth. So on one hand, if we want to do those things that you mentioned, then it has to go through the state, and the state normally either reject it or accept it, and that's the biggest problem. And we've created TSRA really to have that. First of all, if we had that single line appropriation that comes direct to Torres Strait through TSRA, that's what the intention of setting up TSRA. To take out the funding that goes to the state on our behalf so that it can be controlled internally by our own people. That never happened because it was what they created, and I chaired that interdepartmental committee between the state and the Commonwealth. And it was top level with the secretaries and that from the Commonwealth and the Director Generals from the state. And that was really, it was a way of government saying, and it was just more of a cover-up really, to hold everybody responsible for their responsibilities. But nothing ever eventuated. So we kept going and talking to them, to both the state and the Commonwealth. I used to go and sit with the state, and when they start mentioning about Commonwealth, I would say, well, watch me, I take my state hat off and I wear the Commonwealth hat. Talk to me. I mean, these are the games that they were playing. And the things that's happening, it's still going on today. And that's why we're talking about self-determination and being able to set something independently so that we can really look at the things that is needed in our communities.
When you say independent, do you mean cutting off from the federal government and just becoming a self-determined organisation and meeting and being, working with the different mob around the islands? Does that mean cutting off your connection to the federal government? Because that's a big move, and I think that it costs a lot of money. Because how do you as a government arm self-determine? Because that's like, for me, that's like Albanese saying Labor are going to self-determine from now on. They can't. The only ones that can self-determine are the ones that are not government. Because government are colonial. Government are white. This white structure, white law, not black law, tribal law, that should self-determine to maintain our very being. So is that what you're saying? Or what does self-determination mean from a government agency? That's what I'm trying to understand.
You mentioned about decolonization.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about now, is decolonize. Think about what we think. I'm not talking about the colonization process. I'm talking about decolonizing. Because when you look at the Uluru statement you have on the mainland, we have Masig statement. That Masig statement states in there exactly the future direction for Torres Strait. And we talk about, because in 1988, when we called for sovereignty, the reason why we called for sovereignty then, there was to break away from Australia, was really, it was a political move just to get that recognition, because we were the forgotten race.
And I understand
out of sight, out of
that.
mind. Okay?
I understand that, but you're still a government agency. And for a government agency to be sovereign, you can't be a government agency. And so I'm here as a sovereign black woman, even though I swore allegiance, but I'm only here to bat for the people that don't get a seat at the table, who don't get invited to a meeting, and who are saying to me, we want a birth on country, we need dialysis, we want employment, we want to self-determine what is needed on our own island, but we've got no money, and we've got to go to the TSRA and beg for money, but we don't get it. So that's what I'm here for, and that's what I'm trying to understand, and it's no disrespect to you as individuals, but you are still a government agency. So I'm here because I want to know, what's the community control? What are the people saying that they want, and why isn't it happening? The dialysis is being there, and there's rows about the land, but people are dying because they don't have access to that dialysis that was agreed to a long time ago. Birthing on country, you've got babies being born that aren't on their own country, which means that their identity is going to be confusing when they're older. So, and I know I've got to pass it on, but I'm worried, the federal government control everything, right? They control Naya, they control the Indigenous minister, they control our lives. And with no disrespect, but the TSRA is controlled by the federal government because you are part of it. You've got the shirt on there. What is happening, and what are your plans to ensure that community control is happening on all the islands? And when people say we want dialysis, that you make that happen. You meet with the Minister for Indigenous Australians. You've got Labor on the end there, that's your local member. So why isn't dialysis happening? Why isn't birthing on country happening? And why is there no employment for your people here? And it's all controlled by government. That's not self-determination. That's not sovereignty. So that's what I'm asking. And then I'll pass it on.
All I can say is that we're in the process of doing something about it. And it's really getting, and I go back to what I said before, look, listen and adapt. them three things. That's never happened. Because not many people listen to us, government or who. They don't listen to us when we say something. They don't come up and see for themselves. They come to TI, they think they see Torres Strait. Torres Strait is not here. Torres Strait is out there. 15 different islands. That's Torres Strait. And people make that assumption when they see Thursday Island, they think everywhere else is like that. No, we're struggling out there. And the isolation and the remoteness has not been taken into consideration. That's why we're doing these things, to ensure that the understanding is spread throughout governments, throughout the world, if it has to. Because I can tell you now, Senator, that in those days that when we've set up, the intention that we've set up TSRA and the Island Coordinating Council, we added only a line to do something. In 1994, when I delivered the Boyer lecture, I said then in 1994, by 2001, when Australia will be celebrating centenary of their federation, Torres Strait will be doing their own thing. That was the vision then of the elders. And by 2000, things changed, obviously. New century, everything. So we're still doing that. We haven't forgotten that the stance that we're having. Nothing to do with us, but we're doing our best to overcome and to ensure that we work in partnership with governments, not to dictate to us, but to work beside us.
Is it possible that you have that relationship with your own mob first before government? Because, you know, since I've been here and before I've been here for years and years, I've been hearing that there's no self-determination on the islands and that there's no community control. It's all run by government. So if the Minister for Indigenous Australians is not listening to you and you continue to get funded for everybody here, then maybe it's about going back to those islands and talking to the heads, the tribal heads, tribal councils, and working together to make sure everyone's looked after. And then tell Malindeary and Labor government that this is what we need for each island based on self-determination. Is that something that you could consider?
Thank you, Senator. That's something we actually do. I refer to your question around the dialysis. So that falls under the Queensland Health responsibility. And where we come in there is in the advocacy and lobbying, not only with our minister and through our local member, but directly with the Queensland state government, the Premier and the relevant ministers, to lobby for the adequate funding to enable that to happen.
They're racist. So they're not, like, how's that going for you? You know, how's that going for Horn Island? It's not.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. It's going very hard. It is very, very difficult in trying to secure that. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to take the opportunity to... Oh, sorry, did you want to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to make 2 points there, just in response to that question. So obviously, you identified the oppression that we face. It's systematic, and the funding models. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now go to the Deputy Chair who's joining us online, Mr. Venning.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks for giving evidence this morning. Apologies I couldn't get up there today. Just on a similar line of questioning, the TSRA has a responsibility for delivering a range of programs, yes, funded via the Commonwealth for the Torres Strait. I understand there is a lack of funding of some of the evidence you've given today, but from your perspective, what investments are reducing the impacts of racism and improving opportunities for Torres Strait Islander communities, and which ones necessarily are not?
No, thank you, Deputy Chair. So pretty much our 8 program areas, where we get funded, we actually get funded directly from Department of Finance. So we don't go through the NIAA or we actually do our own appropriation directly with Department of Finance. And our programs are shaped by our board. That's I think I mentioned how unique we were in my upfront statement, where we have the ability to design programs that are based on our region and what we're seeing in the communities. And so it's through our funding programs like Healthy and Safe Communities, Culture, Arts and Heritage, Economic Development, Fisheries, Environmental Management, is where we provide funding to groups who look at initiatives around addressing racism or any other initiatives that assist in reducing racism and violence.
And so the governance of those programs, the effectiveness of those programs, that's determined solely by your board, or is there some oversight from the Commonwealth?
Thank you, Deputy. So our board is the accountable authority for the TSRA, so it's determined by our board, and we also are required as part of our funding requirements to report back to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. So that's where the two-way reporting there with our board and our Minister.
Yeah, thank you. One more question from me, Chair. The lack of internet connectivity is a feature of many of your outer island communities, as it is with other remote online communities, but it's particularly a feature up there given, the disparity of the island, but also the weather events that you have. And we're also, throughout this community, we're understanding that online racism is a huge problem, particularly with the prevalence of social media in a lot of these communities. Given that some of your communities don't necessarily have the connectivity that larger communities have, do you see a difference in the effects of racism in, say, on Thursday Island, where you've got great internet connectivity, and maybe some of the outer communities?
Thank you, Deputy Chair. So I think in terms of online racism, it pretty much happens everywhere. With lack of signals and that, compared to TI, like the outer islands, there's sort of no difference in the amount of racism that gets floated around on social media. I personally don't have any social media, but I know across all our islands, even though when island signals are down, as soon as the signals are back up, those issues come up again, and all our young people all have phones, as we all know. And so it's pretty much across the board.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Venning. Mr. G.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could just expand on some of the instances of racism that people in the Torres Strait region face, and what would you like to see in terms of solutions to effectively or more effectively deal with racism?
Could you just repeat the question there, please?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you can expand on some of the instances of racism faced by people in this region, and can you maybe point the committee to some initiatives which you believe may be effective in dealing with racism and combating it?
Thank you, Senator. So I'll talk more around the systematic racism where we're seeing, I'll give a specific example. For years and years, we've been lobbying both state and Commonwealth governments for a freight subsidy for the region. As I mentioned earlier there, we don't have roads. All our shipping comes in by boat or by ship. And we're looking at, I think Tasmania has a freight subsidy, that
yeah, they do
assist them there. We've been pushing for years, ever since I've been here, to have a similar or same arrangement. It costs way more to deliver goods and services up here than anywhere else there. And what we're seeing is there's a sort of a feeling like, because we're out of sight, out of mind,
Yeah.
No one's listening to us. And I'll give an example. In the next month or so, given the fuel crisis that we're experiencing throughout the country there, so our local shipping is about to increase freight costs by 35%. That'll really cripple the region. That'll make the prices of our shelves go up.
Yeah.
It'll have a major effect on our fisheries. And what we're seeing is, all these subsidies that are put out there by both Commonwealth and state government that assist the truckies. They've had levies removed, to help them get through this fuel crisis. We've had none of that applied to our freight services up here, and it does have a major effect on all our islands, because the shipping comes in here, and then it gets offloaded to smaller barges and then distributed to the islands. So we sort of see an unfair playing field there where, we're sort of out of sight, out of mind, and not being listened to around the support we need in that area there.
So you want a freight equalisation scheme like Tasmania has?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other issues which you wanted to raise in terms of instances of racism or measures to better deal with racism and combat it?
I just want to mention about institutionalized racism. In that sense, it's very, people can see what's happening. I mean, about our people being, like in health, for instance,
Yeah.
or other departments and that, they're qualified, they're ready to return, but there's no positions available.
Yeah.
And we're still seeing influx of people from outside coming in to do the same work that we know that our people can do it, because the advantage obviously is the communication, because they can communicate both
Yeah.
in our own tongue
Yeah.
as well as English. But they've never given the opportunity to have a choice to come back, to do whatever they could do and help the community. I'm sure you'll find that there's a lot of them that wanting to come back, but the opportunity is just not there, right across the board.
Thank you.
Through the chair, can I just add to that? I'll give an example. So Queensland Health, for example. So local people here aren't, when they apply for jobs in Queensland Health, they're not eligible for housing because they're deemed as local. They're taught to already be able to accommodate themselves or stay with family. People from outside the region, non-Indigenous people that come up for employment up here, are all housed. So that's probably a direct example I can give in that space there,
Yeah.
where there's a disparity of the entitlements that local people get compared to outside people.
Okay.
I would like to add on to that. We call it the ceiling in the region. That goes right across every government department in the region. We call it the ceiling. Local people build up and hit the ceiling. After that, you don't see local people. That's up to APS 6 level. After that, it's hardly you see my people. We call it the ceiling. Obviously, people who work in these government departments, they would like to further their education and go higher levels in government, but there is that ceiling there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just for the record, I'd want a freight equalisation scheme up here as well. I think you need to be fighting for that, because I don't see why Tasmania should have one and you shouldn't have one here. Anyway, that's just a personal opinion, Chair. Thank you for that.
Very much. Just noting we are over time, but I'm going to go to Mr. Smith for a couple of quick questions before we finish up.
Obviously, I've visited many of the islands and have seen firsthand the challenges that exist, particularly with, Saibai, Boigidwan, Mer, the impacts of climate change and the threat that is really existential to culture, community, and everything. Do you feel there is an element of racism in the response to how not just Australia but the world is dealing with the climate crisis and what that means existentially for the people of the Torres Strait?
Thank you, Member Leichert. So, yes, in terms of, and I think we're all aware there of that court case that went through the courts last year. Two of our elders, Pabai and Kabai case, and I think we all know the results of that there, and the courts saying that governments don't have or don't owe the Torres Strait anything around that. So that's a direct racist statement right there. And I'm mindful that the two elders are appealing that decision there. But we're also seeing it in the funding space. And I'll give an example. We're up to seawall stage 3. So a TSRA does a lot of mitigating works in the climate change space with seawalls, mainly seawalls. And so we're up to seawall stage 3. And seawalls is a joint arrangement between the Commonwealth and state. They both provide dollar for dollar funding. Stage 3, we've only received the Commonwealth component. The Queensland state component did not come through. We have been actively lobbying and pushing really hard for that component. But yeah, what we're seeing is even in the funding space, they're starting to step back. And so it is a challenge for us because we can't do stage 3 without the joint funding. But yeah, I think in terms of, we're sort of forgotten when it comes to things like that. And it's only when something big happens in the region where we make the map. For example, we had the foreign incursions a couple of months ago. Then you see us on the map and people start taking notice. But yeah, it is a really hard challenge for us in the climate change space in getting the recognition. And also when we see the billions of dollars being provided to overseas countries, and our common thing is, what about us? Your own backyard, and we're forgotten. So yes, that's really.
Just from where I sit, to the chair, is that I think a couple of things that it's been mentioned before, about our islands, and these are words of the elders at the time. And what they've said is that relocation is not an alternative for Torres Strait. If these islands sink, we will sink with these islands, full stop. And the thing is, when that decision came out in the court, I was in the court when the decision was made, and the judge actually said that he gave it as he saw it, but then politically it needs to be taken up with government about the duty of care with climate change to Torres Strait. And my thoughts at the time was that using that, the political stance then can be seen as if, well, we don't really have a responsibility. And I've always asked myself the same question about the region, Torres Strait. That government, is the government saying to us in an indirect way that what sort of return on our investment do we get in terms of our very existence? That's something that we need to understand ourselves. That what is the thinking of governments at this point in time? Because the slowness of everything that we do, it seems like a drag in trying to do the things we want to see happen. And when you look at how they projected the climate change, for 2050 and where Torres Strait is going to be at that time. All this, so to me, in my lifetime, I just seem to think that the dragging of chain is deliberate, and it may be just waiting for time for natural causes to take place. And we just can't afford that. We need to ensure that actions need to be taken now, make it happen, and let's all move on in whatever we want to do. And I just say this because we need really to do something urgently in terms of what is happening. Thank you.
If I may add to that, please, Chair, please, the board. Just around the funding framework for Indigenous, rural and remote communities. We're talking about the CPI of 3.8%, you know, and a lot of the funding is based around delivery on mainland, whereas when you come to rural and remote, that, you know, obviously will go up. You're looking at about 300 to 400% increase. We're talking about the C-SWIFT 35% increase. So the actual funding model for this region needs to be reviewed. That's why we're in the predicament we are now. Eso.
Thank you. That concludes the time that we've got for questions for you this morning. I expect you probably will get some questions on notice from the committee. When you do, the committee's asked if you can please respond to those by the 21st of August. You'll get an email from the Secretariat as well with any written questions on notice and the timeframes. And if there's any challenges with getting those responses back, then just have a conversation with the Secretariat. We have gone over the time that we had with you, so I appreciate you sticking with us until the committee had finished its questions for this morning. You'll be sent a copy of the transcript from today as well, and you'll have an opportunity to look through it. And if you see anything that's wrong in there, any errors, you're welcome to request that those be fixed. Thank you very much. We'll now take a very brief suspension while we swap over our witnesses at the table.
Thank you, Jan.
Call on representatives from the Northern Peninsula Area Regional Council, Torres Shire Council and Torres Strait Island Regional Council to give evidence. Before we proceed, I'll hand over to Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet, the Quireg Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I want to acknowledge the mats that we meet on today and the importance that the mats have in Torres Strait Islander culture, as you were born on the mat and you will leave on the mat, and all important decisions will be made on the mat. I thank you all for taking the time today and wish to acknowledge, of course, the sorry business that is happening across the islands at the moment. And I know this is a very hard time for many members of the community, so we do really appreciate the effort in coming together today, and welcome, of course, from the mainland and Park. Before we get started, Mayor Poi Poi, could I ask you to give us an opening prayer, please?
Okay, thank you. Augat tati, augat kazi, augat maigimari. Ngailak ni biya yudemin, inu kuruse nga pangaimunia kalmel. Ngailak eso po ibemin, inu maigimari, pangaimunia kaibau gigipa. Ni kay augat, pina augat, kapo augat, mamal augat, adapuday ngaro augat, waraginga matangi keda kay kunakan augat. Amen. Eso.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. I'll now invite each of you to state your full name and the capacity in which you appeared before the committee. Yep, we can start at any end of the table. We can start in the middle. Or do you want to start down this end? Okay. Maybe that's easier.
Good morning, Joint Select Committee. My name is Delassa Yorkston, and I'm the CEO for Northern Peninsula Area Regional Council.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mary Yulu, Deputy Mayor for NPAC and Magical Councillor for Division 2.
Kapatenga ngitamul pamura, Parliamentary Committee, Maunel Robert Poi Poi. Good morning. My name's Robert Poi Poi. I'm the Mayor for Northern Peninsula Area Regional Council. So.
Thank you.
Kapumigi Batanga, good morning. My name is Elsie Siriat, Mayor for Torres Shire Council.
Thank you.
Kapumigi Batanga, Mary Barney, CEO, Torres Shire Council.
Kapu Bailud, Kapu Batanga, Kapumigi Batanga. My name is Kebe Tamu. I'm Councillor for Division 10, Waraba Island, for Torres Strait Island Regional Council.
Thank you very much. I've got a short spiel that I need to read, and then I'll invite each of you to make opening statements as well. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege and is also being broadcast live on the Parliament's website with audio. I remind members of the gallery that you do need the consent of the committee and witnesses at the table before taking photos or videos. If you see people taking videos or filming, it's because they have got the consent of the committee beforehand. We will be joined very shortly online too by the Deputy Chair, Mr. Venning. So if you hear a little ding online, that'll be him returning to us. So to assist with the dual nature of the hearing, when responding to questions, it'd be helpful if you just say who's responding to the question at the table, so he knows who's talking. And it's also helpful for people who might be listening online as well to the live broadcast. I now invite you to make an opening statement. I'm wondering if I should start down this end of the table again.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank Father God for this day, for the gift of life and for his blessings upon us. Secondly, I'd like to acknowledge the Quireg Nation, the traditional owners of this land, that the Joint Standing Committee holds its hearing into the inquiry into racism, hate, violence directed at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Also, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners from Zenath Kes and also the traditional owners from around this nation. I acknowledge also our families in sorry business, particularly here on Thursday Island today. As we sit here, we know that there's a funeral in place. So our condolences to our families this morning. As Indigenous people, there is one thing we know, and we all know for sure. Our blood connects us to the land. Our culture is a living culture. It is passed down from generation to generation. It cannot be taught in any classroom or university. It's instilled within us. Our language identifies us. Our totems and our clan, our dance and our songline makes way for us. Our heritage and our culture connects us. It's our birthright. It cannot be taken away from us. And today, like every other day, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Council commends the Joint Standing Committee for calling this inquiry. Today I'm here with Mayor Poi Poi and Deputy Mayor Yulu representing NPark, Northern Peninsula Area Regional Council. We represent the 5 communities of the NPA, Bamiga, Saisia, Injinu, New Mapoon and New Magico. NPA is very unique local government in Queensland and in Australia and has been in existence since 2008 as part of the local government reforms. Nowhere in the state of Queensland and nowhere in the nation has a government amalgamated Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and culture together to form one local government. And this has been an issue for us on the mainland for a very long time, since 2008. This year, the NAIDOC theme is 50 years deadly. And next year, we will celebrate the 60th anniversary of the 1967 referendum. Yet the Closing the Gap report that comes out has done nothing but failed our people. So we continue to face racism every day. Every day as we face racism, it's either in person, it's online, in social media platforms, or through unconscious bias, through policies and government bureaucracy and red tape. The law enforcement systems has failed us, and we face injustice every day of our lives as we watch our children being taken away. The stats against us continues to grow. Today, racism is even worse than before. The dial has been turned against us even more since the failed referendum. In NPark, there are a number of areas we would like to raise where racism has directly affected us. The first one is the Fitzgerald inquiry that brought the alcohol management plans to our region. So for over 20 years, we have been discriminated as a community and as a people, particularly the Cape Councils in Queensland, where there are alcohol management plans. So we are treated differently. There has been no support systems or mechanisms in place for us. And 20 years on, all we now see is an increase of sly grogging, ice and other meth and other drugs into our community that continues to compound against our communities. So for so long we've been calling for the Queensland government to come and review those AMPs, but that continues to fall on deaf ears. The other thing we suffer in Queensland is while the Premier can have permanent 50-cent fares, bus fares, rail fares and public transport for regional centres, Cairns, Townsville, Brisbane and the rest of Queensland, we continue to fight for a permanent freight subsidy. So again, we feel that there's bias and there's racism against our Cape Councils. It's great to have permanent 50-cent fares, but it's really bad when every single Cape York community, including our council, does not have a public transport system, does not have a rail system, does not have a bus system. And as we said, we continue to advocate for a permanent freight subsidy for our people. The removal of CDP has certainly affected us. Back in the 1990s and the early 2000s, we had real jobs, we had real community training, we had real outcomes. Now by privatising it, advertising it and making it a commodity for anyone who would like to apply for it, our communities now see that failure. In Queensland, and particularly in the Torres Strait, and we are here today, and I fully respect the TSRA as a Torres Strait Islander. However, at the demise of ATSIC, what's happened is that we now do not have a representative bodies for the Aboriginal communities and councils in Cape York and around the nation. So we no longer have a voice. The provisions of NIA and the provisions of the ACC hasn't really represented our people. So we would also like to raise that. Housing has failed us. We're in the worst situation for housing. The Napari program that came forward, it at least gave us 10 years and $5 billion worth of housing where we could plan for all remote and Indigenous communities around Australia. Since the Napari program has finished off, we have had no funding to help us with our housing. So we're in a critical housing condition now, and we ask the Parliamentary Committee to consider, through the HAF funding, to have an identified Indigenous funding round for us so that we can build our own homes. We are so far behind that we need $1 billion in the first iteration to be able to play catch up for all our housing. Health also fails us, and also the lack of investment for critical infrastructure, and the list goes on. So with that, just want to ask the Parliamentary Committee to consider our submission that we put forward and also the deliberations that we will have today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that opening statement. Yep.
Can I add on to the opening statement? Mayor Poi Poi, NPA Regional Council. Just on racism inquiry, the referendum, as we all know, was the biggest response. Clear response, yes or no vote, racism exists. Especially on social media, it causes harm, perpetuates an oppression, and supports the deficit narrative. Social, economic, commercial determinants impacts our health that disadvantages us. Are we not equal? Look at the burden of disease per population in remote areas in comparison to non-Indigenous counterparts. Funding models that support or doesn't support services systems to enable better outcomes. Analyzing the weeds causes a level of harm when we live with disadvantages from a level of systemic racism day in, day out, faced in healthcare, schools, and justice systems. We have the answer for place-based solutions. Example, better funding models, funding distribution methodology, our cultural governance to center our knowledge system to boost our livelihoods throughout nation building and potential local economic growth. Decolonizing our world is the best economic strategy and solution to racism. Anti-Semitism law, example, to protect our First Nations citizens. Eso. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the Torres Strait Council.
Thank you, Chair. I too want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we gather here today, the Kayardild Nation, and pay my respect to our elders past, present, and emerging, and extending that respect to all First Nations who are here in this room with me and who are watching abroad. Thank you so much for the committee to be here present today. Torres Strait Council, I'm here today with CEO Mary Bunny, and I'll just give an overview and the CEO will elaborate more with me. Torres Strait Council is 51% government-owned, 4% rate base. We've been saying for a very long time that Torres Strait Council, all of us here at this table, is unique when it comes to policy change and policy making, that one size don't fit all of us. The water separates us from the mainland, which means that we don't have access to freight. Monopoly is at our hands when it comes to freight, air freight, sea freight. That includes road train as well for us here. We have an opportunity where we are a mini Canberra, where we have all three-tier government here in the Torres Strait. And Torres Strait also is a regional hub where we cater for the needs of everyone here. So when we say that Torres Strait Council is 51% government-owned, government is exempt in paying rates. By the sound of when we say 51% owned, we would think that we'd be rich in our rate base. But housing is a crisis throughout nationally, but for us here, it's evident that our health stats shows that our people are dying basically simply because of lack of housing for our people in our mob. Land is scarce, yes, we know that. We're always advocating to have lands unlocked so that we could build houses for our people in our mob, and I'll get my CEO to elaborate on all the other stuff that has been identified by the CEO of NPark that we face similarity. I just want to also acknowledge the AMP in the First Nation communities. We are made of 17 First Nation community. Torres Strait Council is a mainstream council. 86% of our population is First Nation people. But when we come down to funding models, Torres Strait, to apply for Indigenous funding, Torres Strait doesn't meet that request because of being a mainstream council. But these are continuous fights that we're having to change the policy to suit our people so that we too can be eligible for the funding rounds. My train of thoughts, what did I say about?
Special consideration?
You go.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Welcome and good morning to all the committee members. Mary Barney, CEO, Torres Strait Council. Just want to thank all the panel members here already, the mayors and CEOs and deputy mayors and our mayor, of course. Just wanted to reconfirm again, agree with all the feedback that's been provided, and rather than repeating it, just want to confirm that is something that we experience being the most far northern councils in the country. What the Mayor was just sharing about that 51% of government presence and us being a mini Canberra, is that that means that there is office spaces, accommodation, a lot of investment, a lot of staff, a lot of people helping our region. But when you look at the statistics and on an everyday basis, that investment and that impact is creating a negative impact more than the positive impact that it's meant to be doing. We mentioned the funding models because even if we wanted to identify the multiple layers of racism, whether that's not being greeted politely as you walk outside because that's part of our culture, we like to acknowledge everyone. When you get snobbed in the street, that's a bit disheartening because we are very, hosting is part of our cultural expression, is a high value of ours. To how the children are treated at school and their needs aren't being met despite the efforts of our community leaders and trying to incorporate cultural values and curriculum. Through to the lack of opportunity, despite the investment in the region, of our young people to be able to get jobs. The fact that as we go through the struggles where you can't actually leave your home as an adult to start your own family, there's nowhere to go, so you end up having multi-generational families in one house, sometimes up to 45 years. Going through to trying to start your own family, having a space. There isn't a space. There isn't a space for young men. There isn't a space for young women. The growing number of youth and children in our population, meaning that there is a lot more needs. But also going through to being an adult and maybe getting a job to then be able to try and save up to buy a house. What we're finding as Torres Strait Council is, yes, we are considered mainstream by local government because we do collect that very minimal rate space. But by having such a government presence on behalf of the whole region, we are constantly having pressure on our infrastructure. So when you have major dense development happening, the council itself is disempowered and not being told that these developments are happening, other than some final tick box exercise at the very end, because there are entitlements that state and Commonwealth can do what they want here. And that ongoing issue about the cost and contributions of those buildings, not only the buildings, the population, the excess vehicles, the excess rubbish, all of those sorts of things, is meaning that the value of having that extra resource in the region does not meet the demand, but also is creating a negative impact on our community. So why we're mentioning funding models is that, again, there are multiple layers of how Indigenous money is being distributed, and from Commonwealth to state, by the time it gets to local government, it's minimal and it doesn't really look like it's enough money to meet the need. But also the systemic racism where councils are not considered or respected as a key partner to deliver critical infrastructure projects, because some of our bids actually try to demonstrate the real cost of doing something. But also when we talk about employment and training, we're wanting to save money down the track that we can maintain assets to the lifespan that they need to, because you can't just replace a sewage treatment plant with a couple of bucks. It's a big expense. So why we're sharing this, and from Torres Strait Council's contribution to the inquiry, is that we would like the committee to recognise that there are multiple layers of racism. There is also major issues with how distribution of funding is from Commonwealth all the way through. And that includes to the extent of policy delivery at officer level as well. So an example recently is that if we're having closing the gap funding, it may be distributed by state. And we were one time concerned because if you get contractors from South, they will not be able to deliver an effective model here because of the shortage of land, the shortage of laydown areas, the high cost freight. So it just means that great investment, but because it goes through all those different stages, which you're probably very much aware of, the cost of things, what we're finding is almost tripling from one year to the next. So an example, just wanted to share why we need to start looking at the true impact and value for money of Commonwealth and state public taxpayers' money, is that if you continue to try and implement mainstream models here, including procurement, and not acknowledge the resources that are here, which are the people and the councils and the community organisations, you'll never have enough money. So we do need to be at this table as an equal party at all levels, and especially with Torres Strait Council, would like to share this insight, because as a recipient of state and Commonwealth decisions and even international diplomacy decisions, we're at capacity now, and there needs to be a better way of doing things for the betterment of the region, but also for transparency for taxpayers' dollars. Thank you.
Thank you. Tizak.
Good morning once again, Chair and members of the committee. First of all, I want to also acknowledge the traditional owners on the land and the waters that we're having this inquiry at, the Kaurek people, the Kaiwalagal Nation, and I'll pay my respects to the elders, past and present. And I also want to acknowledge Torres Strait Island and Aboriginal leaders and community members that have contributed evidence to this inquiry. Also, thank you for bringing this inquiry to Thursday Island. It is important that the committee hears evidence in the Torres Strait, not only about the Torres Strait. For TSERC, our council's evidence responds most directly to paragraphs A, C, E, and F of the terms of reference, the nature and impact of racism, initiatives that reduce harm, reporting and response mechanisms, and other related matters. Council does not seek to duplicate specialist evidence on online platforms or ideologically motivated extremism. Our direct evidence is about systematic and institutional racism, as it can operate through public policy, funding rules, administrative practice, and fragmented accountability. I want to be precise. Council is not saying that every funding shortfall, delay, or poor service outcome by itself is racism. We do not allege that every public official acts with discriminatory intent. Our concern is cumulative to the effects of systems. When governments know that a standard policy or funding model repeatedly produces substantially unequal outcomes for remote First Nations communities, but the model is not adjusted over time, the result can be structural discrimination. Council uses the structural racism in that public policy sense, rules and practices that appear neutral but in their operation repeatedly deny equivalent access, opportunity, safety, or decision-making power. TSIC represents 15 island communities spread across approximately 42,000 square kilometres of sea at Australia's northern border. A mainland delivery model does not translate neatly to an island region, like you've heard here before. Freight, marine access, mobilization, weather, a thin contractor market, biosecurity, and climate exposure materially alter the cost and risk of every project. Council's updated strategic investment plan identifies approximately $1.4 billion in infrastructure investment required over the next 5 years. That is Council's planning estimate across critical assets. It is not a claim that the whole amount is caused by racism. It does, however, demonstrate the scale of the gap that accumulates when policy and funding settings do not keep pace with the actual cost of providing essential services in the Torres Strait. The assets involved are not luxuries. They include water and wastewater systems, road and drainage, seawalls, marine and aviation access, waste facilities, community facilities, and the infrastructure that supports housing. When renewal is delayed, the consequences are lived by people. Less reliable services, constrained housing, higher costs, reduced mobility, greater exposure to climate and disaster risk, fewer opportunities for education, employment, and enterprise. Equity of allocation is not equity of outcome. A formula can give the same nominal amount to a mainland project and an island project, yet purchase far less in the Torres Strait. Short-term grants can compound the problem. While approvals, procurement, and mobilization occur, costs rise, scope is reduced, and work is deferred. Communities are then required to prove the same need again in the next funding round. That cycle produces consultation fatigue, administrative burden, and declining trust. People see they're acknowledged but not resolved. That is a form of collective harm relevant to paragraph A. The same issue appears in governance, responsibilities spread across Commonwealth, Queensland, statutory, local government and service provider arrangements. Council is often the institution closest to community and expect to assist delivery, while many of the decisive funding and policy levers sit elsewhere. When responsibility is fragmented, accountability is also fragmented. In 1997, the Parliamentary Report, Torres Strait Islanders a New Deal, examined greater autonomy and the need for better coordination. Almost 3 decades later, important aspirations remain unfinished. Council is not calling for removal of institutions or a transfer of responsibility without resource. We are calling for a clear regional settlement, decisions made at the lowest effective level, responsibilities that are transparent, funding that is long-term, and genuine authority for Torres Strait people over the matters that shape their lives. Also, I wanted to just go back and touch on the New Deal, greater autonomy for the Torres Strait. That's something that's been an aspiration since 1936, 1937, and something that's come through in that New Deal, the greater autonomy for Torres Strait. It was a similar hearing like this, similar inquest into that, recommendations that came from it through that Commonwealth process, and it's something that's still been sitting around as an aspiration. Next year, it's going to be 30 years, and we still haven't achieved greater autonomy for the Torres Strait. But it's the absolute aspiration that we Torres Strait Islanders have. And it's something that will remove systematic racism, institutional racism in our region for our people if we are able to manage our own affairs, make our own decisions with the funding models that suit us for our people to better the lifestyle and lives of our people and our region. Also, paragraph E asks about reporting and responding to racism. A person should not need to be an expert in jurisdiction or to report discriminatory treatment. Yet, the relevant pathway may involve an employer, service provider, police, a regulator, a human rights body, or a Commonwealth or state agency. Council's experience is that fragmented systems can lead to referral between bodies, uncertain timeframes, limited feedback, and no clear view of whether the underlying institutional problem has been addressed. A cultural safe response requires more than an email address. It requires a no wrong door approach, active referral between agencies, published timeframes, reasons for decisions, review rights, support for complainants, and public reporting of de-identified trends and outcomes. Those standards should operate across jurisdictions and institutions, not depend on where the complaint happens to land. Paragraph C asks what works. Council's position is that one-off cultural awareness training is not enough. Training may help individual behavior, but it does not correct a funding formula, a procurement rule, or a service model built on assumptions that do not fit the Torres Strait. Effective initiatives include First Nations equity impact assessment before major policies, program and funding formulas are approved, co-design with local decision makers and community-controlled organizations, multi-year investment agreements with transparent outcomes and independent monitoring, local collection and ownership of data on racism, complaints, and service equity, procurement and workforce settings that build local capability, and sustained community-led anti-racism and cultural safety programs. Council asks the committee to consider economic self-determination under paragraph F. Dependency is often spoken about as though it were a failure of communities. Policy can create administrative dependency when communities are required to rely on recurrent grants because they lack the infrastructure, market access, investment certainty, and decision-making authority needed to grow local economies. The Torres Strait also carries a nationally significant border role. Our communities contribute through their permanent presence, cultural knowledge, and long-standing relationship across the treaty region. Investment in local infrastructure and capability should be commensurate with those responsibilities and developed in partnership with regional leadership. The Torres Strait Treaty protects traditional ways of life and recognizes traditional activities including barter and market trade. Council supports careful exploration of lawful reforms and administrative arrangements that can improve freight, market access, and local enterprise. Any change must be jointly negotiated and remain consistent with customs, immigration, biosecurity, fisheries management, law enforcement, and national security. This is not a call to weaken the border, it is a call to design border and economic policy with the people who live there. Council asked the committee to recommend 8 practical actions. Recognize structural and institutional racism. The final report should expressly examine persistent discriminatory effects of policies and institutional practices, while distinguishing systemic effect of allegations about individual intent. Build a Torres Strait specific evidence base. Support locally governed data on the prevalence and impacts of racism, complaints, service access, and institutional outcomes, rather than subsuming Torres Strait experience within broader categories. Review fund and service equity. Commission an independent jointly governed review of Commonwealth and Queensland funding and service arrangements of Torres Strait, including indexation, freight, mobilization, remote market failure, climate and disaster risk, and whole life of asset costs. Negotiate a long-term investment agreement, align Commonwealth, Queensland, and regional commitments to a transparent multi-year infrastructure and service pipeline based on demonstrated need and realistic remote delivery costs, strengthen regional decision-making and accountability, advance the unresolved autonomy and coordination objectives identified in the 1997 New Deal report, with clear responsibilities, local authority, and resources matched to functions. Create national minimum reporting standards. Establish a culturally safe, no wrong door model, common time frames, active referral, reasons for decisions, review rights, support for complainants, and public reporting of de-identified outcomes. Funding community-led prevention and institutional reform, support sustained anti-racism and cultural safety initiatives, and require First Nations equity impact assessment for major policies, programs, and funding methodologies. Advance economic self-determination and border partnership involved in procurement, infrastructure, enterprise and workforce capability, explore treaty-based opportunities, and provide long-term border capability investment developed with regional leadership. In closing, Council is not asking the committee to label every disadvantage as racism. We are asking it to define racism so narrowly that only overt slurs as hostility are visible, while recurring institutional patterns that shapes people's health, safety, opportunity, and voice remain outside the frame. We are not seeking preferential treatment. We are seeking equity, policy, and investment to actually geographic cost and responsibilities. Accountability that communities can see, and decision made with Torres Strait people, not for us. The Torres Strait stands ready to work with the Commonwealth, Queensland, and this Parliament to build a future found on dignity, self-determination, resilience, and shared prosperity.
Thank you. We will now proceed to questions, but before we do, can I ask that each of you table your opening statements for the committee? I mean, and you can just do that by emailing the things you wrote out to the Secretariat. If that can be provided to the committee, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Senator Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your powerful contributions. I had to cross off all the questions I had because you covered so much. It was brilliant. But I still have questions. And to let you know that I did call for the federal government to give us a minimum of 10% of all new public and social housing supply to be allocated to First Peoples in urban, regional and remote areas. That wasn't supported by the Labor Party or Labor federal government, but I did fight for it, and I did put an amendment into the HAF so that we could get a carve out, and that was knocked out. So I'm just one little black sovereign senator in that place. Can you tell us a bit about access to food in the Torres Strait, and what response have you had when you've raised this issue with both Queensland and federal governments? Anybody can answer that. Or, yeah.
Mary Barney, on behalf of Torres Strait Council, CEO. Great question, Senator Thorpe. A recent example is we had a state-funded retail freight subsidy that was implemented over the last few years in Torres and NPA, especially the Outer Islands as well, I believe. That was quite a significant amount of funding, and I think it was a great win for the region. But when it came to implementing that funding and getting those benefits directly to the disadvantaged communities, again, as mentioned earlier, there would have been some sort of processes there where how the money was from Treasury to the relevant departments and so on. So it ended up working out that And I'd been away for 4 years, so it was really great to come back to see it. Because normally when you would go to the shop, say a plastic bag of food, one bag, maybe $60, $70, meant that we could get probably $2 to $3 savings. But as part of that, over the time, everything else has gone up. So when there is government investment to tackle one issue, it was generous, but then in the scheme of things, it didn't really make a difference. So fresh fruit and vegetables, as you would know, is really important for people's health and well-being. There's been many attempts and investment to try and get that food source more stabilised in the region. But again, over time, if it's been a government-funded program, it depends on the government of the day. So the communities never get to see the full benefit of it, let alone the change in behaviour and lifestyle to see real health outcomes like reduction in diabetes, reduction in amputations, reduction in chronic disease, reduction in multiple burdens of disease at the same time. So in terms of food security is still really important. It would be great to, gardening is part of our traditional cultures because we're in island environments. But when you try to implement mainstream models of, say, growing iceberg lettuce that doesn't meet the environment and can't grow naturally but needs all the extra horticultural sort of things, it's again creating a bigger issue because what we're trying to do for our diet is meet a supply of food that is only suitable for other climates, for instance. So again, it would be great that we could look at food security. We do need to have things like food banks, being able to store. Torres Strait Council is looking at how we can have food security, fuel security, energy security, those sorts of things, because if the barge doesn't come, we don't get food. This is part of an ongoing change in policy over the years. But even as cultural practices of trading traditionally, we can't do that because of all the biosecurity. So this is some of the feedback that especially Councillor Tamu has raised, is that the burden of maintaining the border, the burden of maintaining the biosecurity zones, we wear all of that, which means that we can't actually trade with each other. If one community has great fertile soil, we can probably trade amongst islands, but the biosecurity risk and the management of it by state and Commonwealth means that we can't, say, buy fresh bananas from even a neighbouring island because you have to go through biosecurity. So there's, again, there are things culturally that we would like to do, but that responsibility of protecting the border and the biosecurity zones means that we're protecting the state and Commonwealth's national agricultural industry, which doesn't get recognised. So that's a long answer there, but yeah.
Thank you. Yep.
Yorkston from NPark. So in relation to where we have been advocating, so for quite a number of years we've been advocating for a freight equalisation scheme similar to Tasmania for the Torres Strait and the NPA region. We've been asking from my understanding, over 2 decades now, because we're no dissimilar to there. The only difference between Tasmanian's freight equalisation scheme is they had the timber that was exported out, so when the barges went back, they were able to bring all the food back, and that's why they called it the Freight Equalisation Scheme. Now, that's a federal scheme. For us up here, we've been advocating for a similar scheme for here. The only difference is obviously we only have seafood that's exported out of here, but at the same time, we're so far away from Cairns. So we're dependent on 2 barges per week that services us, and that's where we get all our food in. Now, if there's a natural disaster in Queensland, and if the roads are cut off, then we suffer up here. Then our shelves get empty, we don't get food here. So food security remains a real issue up here, not only the cost of it, but also the quality of it and the ability to secure it here. There was a Queensland Government summit held here in 2021, and that as part of that we were able to negotiate, but it was only temporary, the freight subsidy that we receive now. So the freight subsidy is only temporary. We were able to advocate and have $64 million over 5 years, covering 4 regions. And the 4 regions was the Torres Strait, the NPA, the Gulf, where we've got some Aboriginal communities there, and also the communities in Cape York. However, and what happens with that subsidy now is you receive it at the register. So as long as the retailers here are registered, when you shop here, you get 20% at the checkout. The issue for us is the subsidy was only in place for 5 years. We're now in the last year, and our communities will struggle once the subsidy goes away. So we're asking for a whole of government bipartisan task force to be set up with both the federal and the state government to be able to have a look at these real issues for us. Because too many times these things are temporary, and as government changes, these legislative, they can make changes and it goes away. We don't have infrastructure here for cold storage or for warehousing storage so that we could hold more supplies. So at any given time, we've only got about 3 weeks worth of food stock in our region here. So we are at the mercy of natural disasters, or if anything happens further down the coast of Queensland for us. So it is an issue that we certainly need assistance with, continue to need assistance for.
Thank you.
Yes. Can I just add on that, please? Thank you. In saying that in this time of the season, it's tourist season for us in NPA, and so a lot of the food do go out of stock for us, and we suffer in our household and in businesses.
Yeah, of course.
Can I add quickly? Sorry. Just with the outer islands around the food security, I think like previous speakers mentioned, Councillor Kebe Tamo from Warraba, from TISEC. Yeah, the freight subsidy that's been around, once again, it goes back to the model that they created. It's something that they didn't consult with us, how we wanted that freight subsidy to work, or to how it will support our communities and our people. It's something that's just been implemented on us, and we just have to go with it. Most recent budget, the state's most recent budget that they just adopted, that subsidy has been reduced, and so we will soon see the effect throughout the communities. And and I also wanted to touch on the local shops that we have, IBIS stores or CQs. They were built by our people, our old people. They were something that they came out of their own pocket to build, but now today it's owned by the state. And that's something as an aspiration when we talk about being economically independent and being less reliant on government. That's some of the things that we need to, bring back to our region, so our people and our region can own the shops and the industries that are up here. Thank you.
So it's owned by Queensland State? Yeah, okay. Recently at Senate estimates, I asked why the Albanese government refused to increase or index the remote area allowance. This supplement is supposed to help people cover the cost of food here in the Torres Strait. The answer I was given is that people on Centrelink already got increases to their payments. What should the federal government be doing so people here can access nutritious food just like people in the city? Would that remote area allowance being increased, because it hasn't been increased forever, but food and everything else has been increased, what should the federal government be doing here to help people?
So, Delisa Yorkston, I think, look, it's really important. There's a lot of things that costs go up, but subsidies don't. A fine example for us is about 10 years ago, the patient travel scheme that helped our people travel for health services was $70 per night for accommodation in Cairns, or if you had to travel to Brisbane. We're here now today, and the subsidy is still $70 per night. So where in Australia would you pay $70 a night besides the backpackers, and you're sick and you're travelling for health or you're travelling for treatment, you would have this. So this costs rise all the time and subsidies never seem to move. So we find that in both state and federal government all the time for us here. Yeah, and if it's the tax is it a tax subsidy or the regional subsidy, Senator, that you're speaking about? Because the Group Aid subsidy has been $1,173 since I started work in 1992. So that hasn't changed for us either.
Yeah, well, this is the federal remote area allowance that hasn't been increased for decades. So I've pushed, as my role is to push for the increase, given everything's increasing and, as you say, the subsidies aren't. So it's that allowance that comes from the federal government. I've got one more question, and it's for the Torres Strait Island Regional Council, and I'll put the rest on notice. But for the benefit of the committee, can you explain the significance of the Masig statement, and based on current progress, how realistic is it that Torres Strait will achieve self-determination and regional autonomy by 2037?
Senator, thank you for the question. Councillor Kebe Tamo. That's something that I forgot to raise in the opening statement. I think it's something that's very important to progressing forward the aspirations of our people to self-determination. Since 2022, when we launched the Masig Statement, or Malungu Yangu Wakai, the voice from the deep. It was a voice or a statement that's been echoing since 1936 and 1937. It's a statement that represents the long-standing aspirations of our people, our ancestors back then, to go towards self-determination, self-manage. Some of the issues talked back in 1937 is still some of the issues that impact us today. And in terms of progressing towards realistically achieving self-determination or regional autonomy by 2037, I think we really haven't gotten the support from government, including government bodies as well. Before the Masig Statement in 2022, I know that the TSRA, who's a Commonwealth statutory body, adopted the adaptation plan towards regional autonomy, and it's something that's been discussed through leadership in the region. It's something that we as a region are serious about, and we want to achieve, because 2037, it will be 100 years since the first councillors meeting. And you would think in 100 years, a lot of changes would take place for our people. We would be managing our own affairs. We would be moving towards becoming our own state or territory. So, to think that how, the support that we've been getting, even with the 1997, the New Deal, Commonwealth inquiry towards greater autonomy for the Torres Strait, recommendations were made, but it was not followed up or pursued by or supported by governments from then till now. So, yeah.
Maybe government don't want you to self-determine.
Exactly.
They just want to be the mission managers all the time and control your life.
And that's where you talk about systematic racism and all of that. And I think that's where the biggest thing is for our region when you talk about racism. They just want to control our people, oppress our people, continue to be oppressed by government. And yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Thorpe. We're going to go online to Mr. Venning.
Thank you. Yeah, most of my questions have been answered, so thank you. But I just wanted to pick up on one point, just the practical point. One of the witnesses talked about the concept of decolonisation for some of those remote Torres Strait and Far North Queensland communities. Just what does that look like in practice?
Mary Barney here, Torres Strait Council CEO. Very good question. Just as we were sort of sharing before about the multiple layers of racism going from personal experience to systemic and historical and all sorts of things, Decolonisation and the impact is similarly the same exercise as well. Senator Thorpe, you mentioned about how the statement could help improve. First of all, English is not our first language, so a lot of our people, when they do talk and take protocol and key leadership roles very seriously, when they do speak, they're speaking from the heart, they're speaking from wisdom, they're speaking from ancestral knowledge, and it's really hard to break that down into English terms. So those statements going back to 1994 to 1936, and that drive is still the same drive. It's something that we live and breathe every day. But the translation piece, when we're holding roles under the Local Government Act and trying to be able to not only demonstrate that there are better ways, but when we say to do things culturally or decolonise thinking, there's real merit in it, which our people now are really able to articulate because we have been allowed to enter these positions now and to have a say and to be able to influence. So when we raise things like decolonisation, it would be really good that we do, which was one of the recommendations, and I'd like to see if it's possible to leave our proposal here, is that there needs to be a full audit of all the state and Commonwealth funding that comes into the region, and we need to be part of that as well. So just as much as this inquiry is really important to tackle racism, there needs to be a bigger inquiry as well about the way money is being spent in the region. Yes, we have a lot of our First Nations people in these roles, but they are bound by the policies of the day. So when we talk about things like looking at funding models and maybe some of the interpretation of how we've been explaining about greater autonomy, it's really about streamlining services. It's making sure that the dollar hits the ground. It's making sure the investment time and energy is attacking the root causes of these issues, and it's ensuring that there's governance at every level, including at a household and individual level, of people's autonomy to be able to decide on what they get to eat, what jobs that they would like to aspire. So it is something that is not a one-word answer, but to be able to address it, just like racism, we need to acknowledge that there is multiple layers of it, from individual experience to the system, but there's also the work that needs to be done in terms of strategy to ensure that it is an ongoing, fully integrated solution, multi-pronged, multifaceted, in a very sensitive space. So if you would think about, our parents were under the Protection Act, where they weren't allowed to move. They had to get permission. They weren't even allowed to leave the islands. They weren't even allowed to marry who they wanted to. They're our parents. So it's not like colonisation is 200, 300 years ago. We're still in it. So I think to be able to create a space, which our leadership can now do, holding these roles, to look at it for what it is, and our up-and-coming generation who need to be armed and understand our history. Big credit to TCIRC for being able to keep pushing that drive. That needs to be something that we should be able to, which we're getting better at, is to say this leadership is going to make sure that using these key statements will directly focus on decolonisation of thinking. We'll also be able to create better models that will guarantee that there's fit for place, fit for purpose, real outcomes. But also what we're finding in Torres Strait Council is that it's cheaper to work and better use of public taxpayers' money to work with the community and the people and to draw on the cultural knowledge that has been established for thousands of years. And if you look at any culture of any community, First Nations or elsewhere, cultures are designed around seasonal practices in line with your feast and famine, and protocols and cultural respect, including welcome to country, is to ensure that you are having safe engagements and you are all on the same page and there's no need to go to war. So these things are still stand, we're still living on the same land, and just wanted to let you know that, if anything, we need to elevate our models of doing things, because we'll find that it's not necessarily something that the history and the government can actually address, because they haven't been privy to that thousands of years of living on country and knowing the best way to do things. So Simple question,
you.
big answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, I guess one of the perennial issues, and we've seen it become more relevant today, is federal funding actually delivering outcomes when you've got remote locations, you've got difference in cultures. You know, the far north Queensland could become any more different than Canberra. In terms of getting that funding to deliver better outcomes, what is the one or two practical changes that you would like to see? If you could pick one or two, what is the practical changes you'd like to see from those funding structures and those governance structures?
Mayor Poi Poi from NPA Regional Council. Just on one of the fundings, as we in NPA heavily rely on the road freight from Cairns up to NPA and how it helps not only us but Torres Shire and TISAC. We heavily rely on the DRFA funding for our roads north of Belora. It's under TMR, the PDR, Peninsula Development Road, and all the access roads going into communities are under Cookshire. So we heavily rely on the DRFA funding, and we heavily rely on road freight. If I could, and road freight is only available for us 6 months a year, most. If I can just make a quick comparison with road freight and sea freight, a local civil contractor had a quote from both road freight and sea freight for a 20-ton machine from Cairns to NPA, Seisha. The road freight was 5,500 to 6,000, which leaves Cairns today, gets to NPA tomorrow. The sea freight quoted 45,000 to 48,000 from Cairns to Seisha in 4 days, or 5 days, the most. So that's the difference, why we rely on the DRFA funding for our roads that can benefit not only us, but TISAC and Torres Shire. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Chair.
Mr. G.
Yes, thank you all very much for your evidence and your contribution to the work of this committee. Mrs. Yorkston, just a couple of matters arising from your statements. Firstly, your observations on the Housing Australia Future Fund. I won't ask you about that, but I have to tell you, I agree with you. I find the Housing Australia Future Fund very city-centric, and I've had these conversations with the Minister that it is not getting out to regional Australia where it needs to be, and obviously including this region as well. So I take on board what you said there, but I won't ask you any questions on that because we're running short on time. I was just wondering if you can elaborate on your comments regarding alcohol management plans and just explain a little bit more to the committee what the issues surrounding that are so that we can get a better understanding, and also anyone listening remotely to this hearing can get a better understanding of what you meant by that.
Thank you, Jalassa Yorkston. So in relation to the alcohol management plans, or they're known as AMPs.
Yeah.
So there was a Fitzgerald inquiry that happened in the state of Queensland over 2 decades ago, in 2004. Through the inquiry, they had a look at, they looked at a lot of factors, the domestic and family violence, things that was happening in Indigenous communities and how they were related to alcohol.
Yep.
So one of the things that came out of the recommendation that came out of the Fitzgerald inquiry was to implement alcohol management plans, AMPs.
Yep.
So that's in the state of Queensland.
Yep.
They are only in Indigenous communities and they're only in the Aboriginal communities. So, for example, all of the communities from Cairns up to the Cape York, we all have AMPs. However, here on Thursday Island and the outer islands, they don't have an AMP.
Right.
So what the AMP does is there's restriction on alcohol. Some communities are dry communities because of the AMP. Our community, there are restrictions on carriage limits and there's restrictions on what alcohol can be sold.
Yeah.
So the impacts for us there is that as soon as the AMPs came in, then we also reduced tavern time. So each community had canteens and taverns, which then led to, instead of having from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. a licensed venue open that you could drink in moderation, they first came out where we could only open for 2 hours a day or 2 hours 3 times a week.
Yeah.
So then that brought in binge drinking, because then people were buying alcohol and they were consuming it fast because you couldn't take it away.
Yeah.
And then our community members would also travel from Bamaga or the NPA to Thursday Island in this sort of weather, risk their lives just to be able to buy alcohol, because you can come here to the Grand Hotel and you could purchase anything.
Yeah.
So the discrimination for us, or where that racism exists, is we haven't had an appropriate review on it because it's now got other compounding effects. Sly grogging came in. People are now buying cast in remote communities for $250 each. So that's just a 4-litre wine cast. Drugs have also come in really hard now as well. So we've got more drugs. We now have ice and meth in our communities. So the discrimination part of it also is that as you get fined for these so if they catch you with a bottle of wine and you shouldn't have it, you then get a fine. Then when the post office doesn't work and you don't get your mail, your fine then turns into a Spurs one. Then after the Spurs, you then lose your license. So there's all of this dominating effect that keeps happening. And all we're saying is it's about time it has to be reviewed. It's about time that, we have to, be realistic about the discrimination here and the racism that's against the Indigenous communities. When they also put the alcohol management plans in place, there was no rehabilitation centres put in place either. So again, pulling out a service, discriminating against our people, but not putting a support mechanism in place to be able to help our communities.
And why can't it be reviewed?
We have asked numerous times to the state government to review it. And government, every time they change, they promise us they'll do a review, but no full review has been done to be able to actually measure the benefits, because 20 years ago, our families were not homeless in Cairns and staying in Cairns longer because they cannot get alcohol in our communities. So we're seeing a lot of different effects happening now that weren't here 20 years ago.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have gone over time, so we might conclude there. Thank you very much for the time you've given the committee today and for your fulsome opening statements. They'll be really helpful for the committee when you get to table those and your answers. I expect you'll get a number of questions on notice from the committee. And so when that happens, if you can please respond to the committee by the 21st of August. The Secretariat will be in touch with all the things that you need to know about that, and with the written questions on notice from committee members as well. And if there is a problem or a challenge in meeting that timeframe, feel free to let the Secretariat know as well. You'll be sent a transcript from the evidence today, and you can have a read through it. If there's anything that's wrong in there, any errors that you find, you can ask that those things be fixed. Thank you very much. On behalf of the committee, we will now suspend for lunch. morning from our lunch break, and I call on Professor Philip Mills to give evidence. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear?
All right. My name is Philip Mills, and I'm here in my professional capacity. I've worked in Torres Strait for a long time in health, and I'm also affiliated with the Royal College of Physicians and also the Australian Medical Association. And I'm also a Kulkul elder of the Torres Strait. So, you know, it's a mixture of sovereign identity as well as, you know, being part of the academy and so forth.
Thank you. I've got a spiel that I need to read out, and then I'll invite you to make an opening statement. So, although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false and misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege and is being broadcast live on Parliament's website with audio. I remind members of the gallery that you do need the consent of the committee before you take any photos or film. Given we've only got one person at the table, I don't think I need to remind you to say your name each time because it's only one person that's going to be responding to questions at the table. You can see who's joining you in the room this afternoon from our nameplates, and we have Mr. Tom Venning joining us via teleconference as well. I now invite you to make an opening statement.
Okay. I think just listening to what's been said and putting an historical perspective in it, and also looking at the connection in terms of the correlation between health status, well-being, and certainly around the mortality and morbidity, there's a real sort of mixture of I suppose reference to the deaths up in the Torres Strait, not as something that should be taken into consideration as far as policy is concerned, but something that should be there as biomarkers of our colonialism, as use these control and the genocide they perpetuate, whether it's through the termination policy, segregation policy, or right through to what you're seeing today in terms of the market, and how organisations representing government, the colonial system, Commonwealth state and local government, and then community tribal group, and how they present, there's one common feature, and that's the sovereign identity that we really need to make sure that the underlying consequences of all the things that have been discussed, whether it's the correlation of sovereign food sovereignty right through to transport, trade, education, welfare, accommodations, subsidy, and so forth, is related to the fact that there's a common denominator, and each time we end up burying a lot of those evidence as a result of the discussions you've had in terms of the infrastructure needed. But there's already that issue of continuum, health continuum, in terms of some of the things that have been mentioned in terms of determinants of health, some of the factors relating to access issue in terms of health, and also in relation to the historical sort of factors that we've experienced in the Torres Strait. So it's not by chance that there's a direct causal effect of a lot of things that's been mentioned here today, where there's some of the structural racism, systemic racism, and also procedural and some of those more daily stuff that we see. The other factor that we need to consideration is we are overburdened with administration in Torres Strait to the extent that one of the most suffocating features of our autonomy is dealing with the administration and how the administration dictates right down to the essence of our existence, what we should be living by in terms of values and principles. We've not been given the opportunity in any way since the segregation period, when we were trapped imprisoned on community as sentinel host and be subject through the entourage of foreign diseases, and not purely in terms of being, I suppose, subjugated to the colonial process, but the whole biopolitical spectrum of how we as human beings are being treated as a means of terra nullius, less than human, and how that has evolved into how the genocidal margin of disparity is being enhanced by the morbidity and premature deaths that we see today. So even though epidemiology sort of comes across and say, okay, these are measures of poverty and measures of, that's all rubbish. It's all rubbish, because we need to call it for what it is. Because a lot of people that die prematurely don't want to die. A lot of people have debilitating conditions due to lack of access to care for ages. But it's got nothing to do with the fact that these policies are not in place. It's just that in terms of how these policies are being systemically rolled out, they've always going to focus on the trajectory where that commodifies our deaths, as opposed to dealing with the prevention and the well-being of our lives. So if you look at the tertiary and the secondary hospitals around the place, you will start to get a feel for the fact that they have no real interest in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. They have no interest. By design, they have no interest. By practice, they have no interest, because their practice is around what they call the germ theory. The germ theory is an evolution of terra nullius, because it's the first failed biological biomedical model of care. So the things that have been said today in terms of the people sitting here is that we've all lost families, and we all understand the injustice around losing families prematurely. But without looking at the death patterns as something that we should be concerned about, and how desensitized the system, the colonial system, has made us, it's going to be very hard for us to say that we can fix all these other things, because the consequences of that, people are going to die. So there's no immediacy between the consequences of death and the injustice that we're seeing in terms of what's been presented to you from a policy point of view. So that's...
Thank you very much. We'll go to questions, and I might begin with Mr. G if you've got questions.
Well, maybe, perhaps just a general one. The committee's dealing with racism and its effects of racism, and how we combat racism. What are your suggestions? What does the Australian government need to do to make a difference?
I think racism determinant of health is vast, and you understand that more than I do in terms of politics. What happens then, during, questions answer time, the PPQs that you guys get, to answer all these questions. And listening to these people here in terms of some of the economic, some of the social determinants that they were talking about of health, we developed our own health solution, and it worked. It reduced hospital admission rates by 41% for all diabetes complication, chronic illness, and it improved perinatal mortality 15 times Queensland.
Yeah.
And if that's not a measure for the benchmark of how you look at racism and how racism is inherent in ensuring longevity of genocide, then we're really not being serious about whether or not this child that's born up here or the child that's born in Yuendamu, say, for instance, is conscripted to a life expectancy that is 25% less than the rest of the country.
Yeah.
So it's a common sense thing that we have to get over initially and say, okay, well, there is a correlation between racism and early death. Yeah. There's a correlation between racism and excess mortality.
Yeah.
There's a correlation between racism and incarceration.
Yep.
And until we start to put that biopolitical lens on it, we're going to be having this conversation, drawing on the health economic side of it, talking to the economic issues, talking to the biopolitical issues. So the thing is that we know our solution. We've got very qualified Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island doctors and nurses. We're quite capable of delivering on the outcomes. Yep. And what we seldomly need is someone to sit there with the tenant of right that takes away our ability to do this stuff. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for my lateness. I got caught up yarning in the cafe with a mob that I haven't seen in quite a few years. So, yeah, apologies if you've already covered this. I'm going to go with the first one. I've got lots. You've been very critical of the so-called health equity policy. Can you explain why this type of policy is not only ineffective, but entrenches the racist and colonial status quo? And is closing the gap one of those policy? Because you can't ever close a gap, and it's failing, as we know. But is that one? And in your view, what would actually make a difference to our people?
I think one of the things I've seen with closing the gap is tagging all funding that's generally available for the public as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Island. Instead, this sort of conscried the impression that we're getting a lot of money when in fact we're getting status quo, and the money is then going into existing practices that haven't changed, but the gatekeepers of those monies are virtually white people. And so the real benefit of closing the gap doesn't go to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people in terms of service and outcomes. What it does go into is creating an industry, and that industry itself feeds on the fact that we need to market the illness of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to get more commodities in terms of Black Death, so that we can feed the illness. And that's some of the basic sort of understanding of the principles that are around the inability of closing the gap to deal with those issues. The other thing that you mentioned, I'm short memory, could you just remind me the first thing you mentioned again?
How, like, you've been critical of the health equity policy.
Yeah, the health equity policy I found was that is benchmark on us having a relationship with the status quo or the average life expectancy of the perpetrators who have inflicted those issues in the first place. So I don't think there's a real sort of understanding and a genuine effort to see the equity as a means of bringing us into a position where we use the measure of our sovereignty as a threshold for improving our lives. My grandmother lived to 103. That's the medical threshold I'm going to use as sovereign health of myself. I'm not going to be benchmarked with someone living in Brisbane who's got no idea of the problems that I face in terms of the issues relating to the fact that my life expectancy is being shortened. So if we look at the different stages, you look at the history of colonisation in the Torres Strait. My grandmother was born before that. There's a whole generation of people, who have lived into their hundreds. So that's the baseline I think is really important for us to understand the difference between sovereign measures and equity measures based on the general population. The other thing, the general population have got all different configurements of support and all the other precipitating factors in there. We can't do that. We can't do that because we were on the tail end of things. We were discriminated against from the outset. So we come to the race not with a sense of difference, but not with a sense of indifference, but with a sense of difference, because they want us to come and say, okay, all of a sudden you don't have all those predisposing factors. You're now deadly like we are. So you're going to be classified as, some deadly sort of image of yourself that we can manipulate and so forth. So that's the other thing that we've got to be careful with. And the last thing I was going to mention in terms of how our death is decidedly a sense of victory, as far as the colonial system is concerned, is a real issue for us, because everything that is imparted towards improving our life expectancy, well, not even longevity of life, is based on someone sitting in Canberra and working out and say, okay, well, this is what we can afford you, and I'm not going to give you any more, because what we want to do is retain that margin of genocidal value that we can tick off back to the cycle. And that's around disparity, because if you look at the disparity, it's been around, they keep going back to it. And that's why I say it's more that real understanding that it's part of a genocidal margin as opposed to just straightforward a disparity because of the determinants of health.
Thank you.
Tell me if I'm not answering your question properly.
You answered mine. It's a genocide. Clearly, they're trying to wipe us out still after, 200 years, over 200 years of genocide. They're still here.
Yeah.
But you answered mine. I don't know if anyone needs any
and the
clarification.
equity, I'm all for health sovereignty.
Yeah. So what is the Torres model of care that you developed?
The Torres model of care is the health sovereignty model. It's mainstream, taking a mainstream public health system and turning it on its arse and reconfigure it to suit the Torres Strait Islander and Aboriginal people in the Torres Strait. So the public becomes the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island in the Torres Strait. The core business of that public health system then is the overall burden of diseases that we see in the Torres Strait, which takes into account all the policy determinants and all the other factors that are related to it. So during the time we looked at implementing the model, we had all the different primary, secondary, and tertiary. So in the secondary and tertiary, we had 300 people. Oh, first of all, sorry, I took pathology off. I took the science off the doctors and the nurses, and I gave it to the community. Because what I did was look at the accreditation process and put standards in there where pathology, to accredit that pathology. They have to have the information go back to the community. They couldn't just test people and take their information and use it as powers against them. And what I also did was that the community also had a right to understand the internal working story as well as the external stories. So the pathology was the mechanism that I used to make sure that we had taken away the clinical mandate of medical supremacists or medical imperialism away from the clinician and given it back to the community. So the model itself then, and based on that, we had 3,000 people on this clinical system that we devised specifically for them, because one of the key elements of colonialism is the disease markers. When you look at, because one thing that don't come to mind is people will say, well, there's no relationship between people who are sick from colonisation to what the conditions that we're seeing today. But they're not talking about the biomedical markers that transcend. And if you look at the biomedical markers, and some of them are doing it now, they're looking at the epigenetic around the biomedical markers, and they're finding out these things actually started during that period of time when people suffered intense trauma. Their systems, their kidney, their heart, all the congenital stuff that are coming, all the autoimmune stuff that are being exported are related to back then. And what we're seeing now is the end product of that. We're seeing people toppling over with a range of multitude of cofactors that come from this. So what I did was, in the Torres model of care, I took what in essence was a public health system based organically around the disease of mainstream people, and the highest priority was elective surgery. Now, if you can have elective surgery or cosmetic surgery, you're pretty lucky, because we were losing legs. You know, we were having kidney transplant. You know, so all the essential factors that related to the conditions that we were seeing as a result of the colonial pressures that we were under. Now, I had to deal with that. So when I turned the service upside down, I also put governance, Torres Strait Council as the governance. Then I put Torres Strait Indigenous managers right through their system, because it was important for the practitioners to understand that they didn't have any control of the service interface with the community. They had control over the practice that they were responsible for. They spent 7-10 years, but they can't extrapolate from that practice to running the services. So the Torres model of care then, so we took 3,000 people out of that cohort, put them on a care recall system. So when I left, they abolished that system. There was 10,000 active care plans shelved. There was pathology results shelved. There was referral of those people shelved. 10 years down the track, and a lot of them end up dying as a result of that. The argument I had with Queensland Health was basically, you need to restore that model of care, because it's not essential practice, but it's an essential component within the trajectory of the diseases that we really need to sustain some sort of order in the life expectancy, natural order in the life expectancy of these people. So if we catch those clinical risk markers early, we can extend their life expectancies simply through the types of intervention we put in place. The Torres model of care was an intervention of Queensland Health. It wasn't Queensland Health intervention of the community.
How much time have we got? So they dismantled it because it worked.
Yeah, well, they intentionally took it away. We know that. We
So
know.
what's replaced it?
What's replaced it is the flying coffin you see outside there, the helicopter, and they've replaced it with $200 million helicopter that goes against all evidence-based science that says that you use emergency medicine to deal with colonial conditions. And if you look at chronic illness as part of that, then emergency medicine that only administer to you at that period of time when you're in that terminal state is too late. So that's the replacement we have at the moment. The eye cost of, very sophisticated tertiary medicine. So a lot of the people that you're talking about who used to access good primary health care, recall and stuff like that, have all been left to die. But the acute system does pick them up when they become eligible through the conditions deteriorating to the state where they resign to the fact that they have to use the health services.
I got one more. Yeah. Can you tell us about Torres and Cape Hospital Health Service essentially investigating itself in response to complaints about their service, like cops investigating cops? What has happened since the investigation report was released last year, and has the service become less racist? And are people still dying? Well, you answered that, of preventable causes every week.
I think they investigated themselves and found themselves to be, and exonerated themselves from any wrongdoing, basically. And that goes without saying that, this track record of Queensland Health is quite common. We asked, well, I certainly asked them for a coronial investigation. A coronial investigation implies there's case that you pick up and you look at them in terms of the predisposing factors of diseases, and then you look at the care as the last thing. But what they did was they said, no, we're just going to look at the service, and we're going to look at service in terms of the people we service. Well, majority of people don't necessarily get those services. The ones who are really suffering from the injustice don't get those services. So when you look at people that you service, naturally the quality framework in Brisbane is going to say, oh, the practice is really good, because they're all emergency doctors dealing with your terminal life stages, giving you last hours. But all those people up there who are in those debilitating states, all those people up there who are suffering, won't get a look in. So that's the difference between what you see out there now. Like, one of the things I noticed in the flying coffin is that they built what do you call those? Their landing sites. They built an helipad. That's almost visible from Evan. You can see it from Evan because it's so clear that what they were doing now is preparing people for their death. I'm just Gavin saying all these things, but preparing people for their death. But that's the irony of the thinking of a system that's based on saviours coming in. We've got 140 doctors, Torres Strait Island doctors, registered with APRA. They can't get access to this place. They can't come on. We've got nurses, we've got allied health, Torres Strait Islanders can't get access to. And yet, the perception by Queensland Health is that if we sympathise with you, then it's enough for us to validate our guilt. And we're saying, no, we want this mob here because they empathise with us. Because if he died, they'll die too. Because that's the difference. But they won't bring him in. I've had discussion with the Premier. The Premier said, restore the Torres model of care. Come up to the administration, nothing. Nothing. Come up to the local situation. We got a commitment from the unions, all the unions, acknowledging that we wanted our health sovereignty in the model of care reinstated. Never transpired. Then we had all the health workers and all the community traumatised. We said we need a trauma strategy as well, because we can't just deal with the problems and the isolation of people who are being traumatised. Nothing. So the review in itself basically reinstated the status quo. Did nothing. I wrote to the DG and he said, Philip, our review has interviewed 40 people. And I wrote to him, I said, during the time you spent interviewing 40 people, 38 people died, 28 people died, what? Nearly 30 people. I said, I'll send you their names so you don't look at stats. So I sent him the names of all those people who died. That really sort of struck me as we're not even visible. We're not, the stats they use, the guys who were collating the stats were sitting 30 to 40 yards from the morgue. There'd be a caravan, a procession of people dying, walking past where they sat, and yet they were looking at the computer, doing data links, collecting mortality and morbidity information. Go out to the morgue, you know? People are dying. But it's happened everywhere. You know, Aboriginal and Torres Strait people are falling down, and yet they revert back to the computer to see if there's any real science around what people are saying. It's, yeah.
Thank you.
I'm containing myself from swearing, so...
So am I.
and they're containing themselves from swearing too.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. As you might remember, I was there when we tried to reinstitute the Torres model of care, and the battle that we had to get it done on the terms of the community versus the terms of the administration. The trauma and harm that occurred as a result of that battle and the subsequent walking away from successive Queensland governments from their commitments to look into it.
Yeah.
Can you go over a little bit about what harm that did to the community?
I think the trauma is one aspect of it, but the actual correlation between the death pattern, perinatal mortality started to appear again. Young kids were dying because what had happened, we had really strong outreach midwife program that were out, and that was cut. So young parents with children now were subjected to the same types of mortality patterns that we were seeing prior to the model being implemented. The age-related adjusted issues to deal with the biological pathway of chronic illness became a real problem, because when you take away all the model of care that concentrated primarily on keeping people alive during those critical stages, well, during those preventive stages, it reduces the expectation. But now we had to build more wards down there. We had a massive injection of funds to build more wards, more beds, a theatre, the tertiary theatre, So the investment actually reflected the failing of the health system in dealing with those basic needs of the people. So there was a lot of people dying. The trauma for the community is that, I mean, you only have to ask these people behind me, is incredible. We're burying people, you know, at one stage, 3 to 4 people a week. And yet we could not get that to be on the radar of even the people living up, the doctors who are working up there.
At one stage in the process, I was actually quite hopeful that we were going to succeed. Do you have any opinion on to why all of a sudden it was just like we got to a point where I thought we were weeks away from re-establishing the Torres model of care? Do you have an opinion on why that was suddenly ceased and what might have happened?
I think what happened was that, like all community initiative, all blackfellow solution, is that when they see it working, they want to make sure that that resurgence of assertion of sovereignty is not being used, is not an example that other community could do. Because we were just on the verge of community controlling mainstream services. You know, we were just on the verge of that. Sorry about that.
No, look, it remains. We were so close.
I have no. It's undecisively obvious that there was no interest in having a solution that worked black people by black people that they needed to promote throughout Queensland. Even though it was good evidence-based science, policy, you know, outcome.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Final question, Senator Thorpe.
So we have a very racist Queensland government who are still, like, they're basically back in the, you know, Captain Cook days. And we have even worse Northern Territory government. Well, they're in competition, actually, on who can kill us quicker and take our children. So given, like, we can't say, oh, we hope for the Queensland government and we hope for the Northern Territory government to do the right thing. They're not going to do that. But we have a federal Labor government. So what do you say to them? What should they be doing to pull these racist governments up and to stop the killing of our people?
Well, you have the LK agreement that the state and federal government sign off on all the time. And I would assume within the LK agreements it's driven by a very mediocrity type policy framework for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people around the country. You've got other levers that are in there as well. You've got, Les remind me of the World Cup, what is it? The UNDRIP, UNDRIP. And that should be something that should be taken in and has part of the domestic sort of, framework that we, as far as legislation is concerned, that we start to look at it. But there's no reason why it can't be started to use as a tool for TSRA in terms of framing their interaction with the community. There's quite a number of things out there politically that can be done. Just to assume that, Nacho has got the ability to do a lot of those things. You need to be able to look at some fundamental sort of agreement within the government and a commitment within the government to making sure that they stay out of our business while they give us the resources. I shouldn't say that. They have targets within in the system. So I would say that judging on all the commissions that's been done, death in custody, right through to what we're doing now, is that there's still a really lot of good recommendations with people faces against it that you can't see. And those recommendations have been related to the fact that there's a disproportionate number of people who have died and faded away as a result of those recommendations not being implemented. So, you know, it's a combination of a number of things, but, you know, it's not something that I have a much, you know, silver bullet for.
Nacho don't even acknowledge your health service here, your community-controlled Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander health service. Nacho don't even acknowledge them.
Yes.
So your health service can't even get funding because they're not ticked off by the Nacho box.
I know.
That's outrageous.
Yeah, the peak, you know, and everything else, you know. And you've got a statutory sort of framework for direct appropriation of, you know, funds through TSRA. But, you know, you have all these other problems where it comes with all these conditions. And as I said, TSRA, when it was first set up, I'm talking out of school, when it was first set up, the discretionary powers that the elected arm had gave them a lot of authority in terms of the delegation and the funding that they would be used to build the community in terms of community autonomy. That discretionary power has been taken away and given back to the administration. So now the administration is actually controlling. You know, everything that's been said here is being driven by the administration. So we have a very colonial infrastructure of administration in the Torres Strait that still work with the principle of the legacy of Terra Nullius.
Thank you. That is the time we've got for questions for you today. Your evidence has been really valuable for the committee, so we really appreciate the time you've taken to give us evidence. If there's anything additional that you want to provide to the committee, you can absolutely do that on notice. I imagine you'll get a number of questions on notice from the committee. The Secretariat will send those through to you. And if you can please respond to those by the 21st of August, we would be grateful. And if there's any challenges in meeting that timeframe, you can let us know. And you'll be sent a copy of the transcript from today. And if when you take a look through it, you see anything that's wrong there, then you're welcome to request that they be fixed. We will now suspend very briefly while we welcome our next witness to the table. Thank you very much. Now resume. Welcome our next witness to the table. Can you, for the committee, please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear?
Malawap Ali Nona. I'm a cultural advisor for the Kauri Nation. I am representing the interests of Kauri through our prescribed body corporate.
Mm-hmm.
I've been given the mandate by our chair, Isaac Makako, and the board of directors to speak here today.
Okay.
about the discriminatory process that we face on Kaurere country.
I've just got a short spiel that I need to read, and then I'll hand over to you to make a statement. Unfortunately, the committee won't have a lot of time to ask questions, so I will hand over to you in just a second for you to make a statement for the committee. And then also the committee there might be some questions to you on notice after today, given we don't have a lot of time to ask you questions. We might write to you with those questions after today. But I'll read my little spiel and then I'll come back to you. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standings as proceedings of the respective houses. So giving a false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard, attracts parliamentary privilege, and is also being broadcast live via audio on the Parliament's website. You can see through our name tags who's joining you today, and we also have Mr. Venning online with us. I will now invite you to make your statement.
Ngai la kulai apa pudi ho mulmun Mario Danaka Bobina Pitulai Kai mulmun Bua Yaka Dante Kitumunka. I acknowledge our spiritual ancestors, Wobin and Pitulai, to speak on our country today. Since 1897, the Aboriginal Protection, Prevention, Sale of Opium Act, the Kaurere people were disadvantaged. Kaurere people are the Aboriginal people of 17 islands in this area. Kaurere people are the biggest landowners outside from Australia. When 1897 was created, the legislation, in 1922, the Kaurere people were forcibly removed by gunpoint from Moralag, Noropai, Waibeni, Kiriri, Amman Island, Thursday Island, Prince of Wales, and Horn Island. They were moved to Moa, and Moalgal, the traditional owners of Moa, and Badulgal, the traditional owners of Badu, were led by the Queensland government to build huts, so forcibly removed. So in 1947, our leader, great-grandfather Elikiam Tom, decided that him and his family will sail back to his birthright country, the Kaurere Nation. Kiriri, Amman Island, that's his homeland. They came back, and the Catholic priests told him that if you want to live on this island, you have to become a Catholic. He disagreed. He said, "This is Inangau Lag, this is my home." So he went to Noropai, Horn Island. By December of that year, in 1947, all the pearl luggers came in and Trocus divers. All the Kaurere people realized that Ilikiam Tom made the move, so everyone came back to Kaurere. But the legacy of that is that we've been dispossessed by the Queensland government. We were never acknowledged. They were going to remove us from here to Gudanyaraikana country, a community that was called Cold Creek. Now it's called Indigenous. But Ate Ilikiam and the Kaurere people stood up. What came about that? We are still here today. When the Torres Strait Treaty was implemented in 1978 by Sir Malcolm Fraser and Sir Michael Samari from Papua New Guinea, 18th of December. In 1984, the Torres Strait Commonwealth Fisheries Act was ratified. And in that legislation, Section 3 allowed the communities on Gudai and Yadaikana country, traditional owners, Injuno, Mapuan, and Alau, to have representation on the PZJA fisheries management. Now, and yet the Kaurareg people were excluded from that legislation. Article 1 of the Torres Strait Treaty refers to the definition of who are traditional inhabitants. It says that the traditional inhabitant of Australia is a Torres Strait Islander. And yet the administration is built on Kaurareg country, the adjacent of the treaty. Now, when you are an Aboriginal person and you are excluded, the gunpoint is still at your head. The trauma, the intergenerational trauma carried by us is still here today. When the evolution of the Torres Strait Regional Authority was created, Section 142A of the ATSIC Act 2005, it stipulates to empower Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. There is a representative for Muralag, Prince of Wales, and Horn Island. Every traditional owners in the Torres Strait are included in the TSRA, except the traditional owners of Kaurareg. This is outright discrimination against Aboriginal people of this land. The PZJA fisheries operates, and yet Kaurareg people and the Gudai and Yadaikana traditional owners are not included in that space. What needs to happen is there needs to be a proper investigation into the process so that Aboriginal people of this region can rightfully speak for their own people. At the moment, there are other people speaking on our behalf. Now, Section 142A of the ATSIC Act and paragraph B, C, D, E refers to island custom and Aboriginal tradition. You see the island custom in TSRA, it displays. Look, I don't argue with that. And I don't disagree with my Torres Strait Islander brothers because for 129 years since 1897 Act, the Protection Act, 129 years, the layer of bureaucracy controlled our lives. And the ideology that I disagree with Torres Strait Islanders is that how we have been marginalized, the Aboriginal people. Hey, come on, Aboriginal people fought for referendum. We fought for ASIC to make changes. What I'm asking here today is that the Kaurareg people, through intergenerational trauma, is very much embedded in our lives. We have moved away from the Cape York Land Council. We have now moved away from GBK. Recently, the North Queensland Council has endorsed the Kaurareg to be a part of the board. Why? Because we want to be amongst our own people. No disrespect to the Torres Strait Islanders, but they are the majority of 99% of GBK. It's intimidating when you're 1% as an Aboriginal person sitting there representing your people. How is your voice channeled properly? Now, when we talk about Section 142A, paragraph B, C, D, and E, there must be, it's acknowledged by the federal parliament that Aboriginal tradition and custom is real. But how come it's not displayed since 1994? This is why it's important that there needs to be a thorough review, because the policies that were created in the fisheries space 1989 by the Island Coordinating Council, it's out of date. In the TSRA board, they have a non-Indigenous person sitting there representing the Masig people. Now, the Masig traditional owners, their prescribed body corporate wrote to TSRA. Guess what? He's still there. Why nothing has been done? Under that legislation, it's only for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Section 142A, to empower Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. We need urgent attention that this situation must be addressed. How can you have a non-Indigenous person sitting there representing people that are not from his background, are not from the same birthright, and yet you are excluding counter-reg people who are been here for 65,000 years, 65,000 years, and yet we don't have a seat in TSRA. We don't even have a jersey on the PCJ fisheries. Aboriginal people went to court back in 1998, 1997, defending the rights of Murray Islanders. The outcome was legislation was amended so that TSRA chairperson can be included to make decisions with the Commonwealth and state ministers. Honourable Senators, this is about democracy. Democracy is here to protect each individual Australian citizen. And yet, counter-reg is not acknowledged, not represented. This rhetoric ends today because we want justice. We want our people to be recognized. This is our nation, counter-reg nation. But yet, decisions are made for others, and yet the people of this region are denied. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your powerful contribution this afternoon for the committee. As I mentioned, unfortunately we won't have time for questions because we do need to move to our next witness, but you will get a number of questions on notice, I suspect, from committee members. And the committee is asked if you could please respond to those by the 21st of August. And if that's not able to be met, then just get in touch with us to chat to us about that. And you'll be sent a copy of the transcript from today. And if when you have a look through it, you see that there's any errors there, you are very welcome to request that they be fixed.
One more thing.
Absolutely.
Honourable Senators. TSRA did a consultation and gave TVH, the transferable vessel holders. I'm not disrespecting the people in the industry, but I'm highlighting to you that this organization gave rights to the non-Indigenous people quotas to fish tropical loch lobster. Now, they are not part of the treaty. They're like a foster child coming into the family. We are the biological products of that treaty. And yet we've been denied our rights. Why are we putting into a quota, not a quota system, but a TAC, total allowable catch, where it's Olympic model, everyone use it. but we don't have the same entitlements like the TBH. They can sell their quota. They've been given all the Australian privileges. And yet, if you look at Article 10, Section 3 of the Torres Strait Treaty, it stipulates to protect traditional Aboriginals' way of life and livelihood and their free movement and their indigenous fauna and flora. Section 8, Objective 1 of the Torres Strait Commonwealth Fisheries Act is the mirror image of Article 10, Section 3. And yet, we've been denied our rights. So no questions?
Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions today because we do need to move on to our next witness. But you will get some written questions on notice from the committee. As I mentioned, we've got a time frame for when those things need to be back by. But we do have to get to our next person who was on the program.
I'll leave you with this.
Yeah.
Nothing is more important than independence and freedom. Ho Chi Minh, 1920. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I have a lot of questions for you, brother. They'll be coming.
Yeah, thank
Not
you.
allowed to ask them.
Thank you very much. That concludes proceedings for today. I want to thank Broadcasting and Secretariat for all their support throughout the day, and all the witnesses who have come forward to give evidence. I'll declare the public hearing closed.